To be a part of your journey today. I am your host, Down, and you're listening to Mysterious Radio. World-renowned psychic medium and Oxford-educated attorney, Mark Anthony, bridges the divide between faith and science. In his new book called The Afterlife Frequency, the scientific proof of spiritual contact and how that awareness will change your life. In this fascinating afterlife exploration, he takes you around the globe, from the cosmic to the subatomic and into the human soul itself, combining physics, neuroscience, and riveting true stories. This book reveals how our electromagnetic soul is pure, eternal energy that never dies. Take spiritual communication, near-death experiences, and deathbed visions out of the shadows of superstition and into the light of 21st century science. It also provides hope for recovery from grief, PTSD, survivor's guilt, or a loved one's suicide or homicide. And you can get Mark's book, The Afterlife Frequency, the scientific proof of spiritual contact and how that awareness will change your life, right now on Amazon in Kindle, audiobook, and paperback. And now, here's my special guest, Mark Anthony.
Mediumistic abilities, and my dad was a Navy SEAL and a NASA engineer. My mom was a commercial illustrator and an artist, and my mother's maternal grandmother, which would be my great grandmother Giovanna, was a very highly gifted psychic medium, and she was actually featured in a PBS special called The Italian Americans, and there was a 4-hour special, it was 2 nights, and PBS did an entire segment on my maternal great-grandmother Giovanna, and they mentioned her psychic abilities, which is really kind of cool seeing that. And then my dad's family, I can track it back to the 1890s. So on both sides of my family, I can track this for generations.
I assume she didn't want to scare you. She already knew she had these abilities, but as a child, did your mom ever react to something that kind of like, what is she seeing, or what is she talking about concerning spirits?
Well, I was 3.5 years old when I started seeing spirits, and I would start talking to my invisible friends, and the thing is, though, my parents could see them as well. So they
were seeing the same things that you were talking about.
Oh yeah. And it's not unusual for a child to, a toddler especially, to have invisible friends. But when mommy and daddy can see these invisible friends, they realize that I had inherited this ability. And I remember my dad was like, "Oh my God, he's got it," and mom's like, "Oh, he's got it." So dad wasn't as excited as mom was because he was afraid how I'd be treated, and because his sister also had these abilities, Marjorie, and what had happened with her is she was able to discern future events in addition to communicate with spirits. And her husband was extremely religious, basically a religious fanatic in my estimation, and he thought what she was doing was somehow evil. And he was a machinist who worked at a steel plant in Pennsylvania. And so one morning he's getting ready to go to work, and Marjorie's like, "You can't go, you can't go, you can't go." And she goes, "I got this terrible feeling." And they had a big argument, and he said, "Fine, I'll stay home." Well, that day a crane was lifting thousands of pounds of steel beams. The cable snapped and it crushed the machine shop that he worked in, killing everybody in it. Instead of repaying her, thinking, "Oh, this is wonderful," he had her committed to a mental institution. He found an unscrupulous psychiatrist who said that she was schizophrenic, and they subjected her against her will to electroshock therapy for a period of 6 months. basically they damaged her brain to the point where she was a shadow of what she'd once been, and she never talked about seeing spirits ever again. And the thing is, this happened years before I was born. I didn't understand why my dad was so worried and kind of upset. And he said, Mark, just don't talk about this. You can talk about this to your mother and I, but other people won't understand because I don't want you getting taken away. Well, that's a kind of scary thing for a toddler to hear, that someone's going to take me away. But as I got older, I started putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Then I just sat down and asked what happened. And my family told me in great detail. So this has been part of my DNA from day one. And, you know, it's not hocus pocus, it's not magic, it's not evil. This is based on our physiology, it is based on quantum physics. There are sound scientific principles to explain this, and we are all, to varying degrees, capable of communicating, or at least feeling the presence of spirits around us.
I got a question. Did you ever see spirits in school? Like maybe children that have passed on, or maybe old people that work there. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, well, I went to Catholic school when I was a kid, and every morning we used to have to go to Mass, and which we were like, again, and you know, with all due respect, you know, it's nice to do that, but I remember there was a funeral mass one time, and I could feel the presence of the person around, and you know, so it's always been there. And I was never afraid of it. And, you know, I'd come home from school, like you were asking, did mom ever do anything? I mean, it was all the time. You know, I'd come home from school and mom would be like, I saw a spirit today. And I'd be, okay, that's cool. Mom, do we have any peanut butter? Yeah, sweetie's over there. And I'd be making myself a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and she'd be telling me about the spirit that she had connected with. So for me, it was just part of my life. And as I got older, I saw that not everybody's mommy and daddy did things like this. And so it was best to keep it to myself.
So you never spoke to it, you spoke about it like to a teacher or anything. Like, I'm saying that I'm just trying to kind of gauge your experiences, because it happened to my son. I think my son has it, but he doesn't concentrate on it, because twice when he was in kindergarten, he saw his grandmother that had just passed away. I mean, and when he told me, he wasn't paying any attention to me trying to get a reaction or anything. He just said, I saw Nana at school today. Well, he got in trouble. He got up out of his seat, was looking outside, and I said, why did you do that? And he said, well, Nana was outside looking at me through the window. She had just passed away. And you know, I asked him a few more questions, and then he went on back to playing. I mean, so I know he was serious. And then he said he saw her again. She passed by his door in class, and he got out in the hallway. He walked out in the hallway, and she went down another hallway. So I think maybe he has it. Also, he's heard a voice. Like when we're talking, me and my wife are talking, and we were talking about my wife's father that had passed away. Right. Ari said he heard a male's voice answer us when we were talking, you know, and it startled him. He's like, did you hear that? And I was like, no. But he said, I heard a male's voice say, yeah.
He very well may be a medium, but before, you know, and certainly you're taking the right approach. You're not being judgmental. You're not reprimanding him. You're listening. You know, listen to him. But see, it's not unusual for young children to perceive spirits. And something seems to happen around age 5. And it may be because kids start going to school and they get involved in other things. But it seems around age 5, most children will stop reporting the sightings of spirits. If he continues to do so, then it appears that he very well may have innate mediumship ability. And I think that the reason that it stops around 5 is because once children start learning things, they start engaging more in left-brained activities, like learning how to tie their shoes, do math, and they also get focused on either kindergarten and or first grade work that starts, you know, filling their mind with more of a block. And so young children don't discriminate. They're not bigots, they're not judgmental, they just are open and accepting of everything until, you know, society teaches them otherwise. And a big part of society is like, you know, you don't see things that other people don't. So I think it's really great that you're being so open-minded and accepting. So just let him go with it. But I would suggest, just have him say, well, when you see these things, talk to me about it. Talk to your parents. Talk to us about this, because other people may not understand, but we will. And I think that's the right approach to take.
Very good. Okay, so let's talk about your book here, The Afterlife Frequency, the Scientific Proof of Spiritual Contact, and how that awareness will change your life. So what do you mean by science and scientific proof? I want you to elaborate on that.
Well, for thousands of years, there have been accounts of people communicating with spirits. Historically, also scripturally, I mean, there's accounts in the Bible's loaded with spirit communication, but also throughout every culture, there have been these accounts. Then there's also been accounts of people who have died, and then they come back to life and start saying, oh my gosh, I went into this tunnel and I went into a light and I saw loved ones I know that were dead, and they describe this bright, intense, and loving light and energy. And we now know that these, and nobody knew what to make of them. These were these strange resurrections where people come back to life with stories that contradicted religious dogma. And now we know that these are near-death experiences. So from the 1970s onwards, near-death experience research, afterlife research, and survival of consciousness research has been conducted very seriously throughout the world and at many universities and other institutions.
Mom, Dad, I'm not throwing shade, but the whole New Year's resolution thing, kind of slipping, no offense. Anyway, my best friend Jenny's dad, crushing it. He uses Blue Apron. He says he ordered one-pan assemble and bake meals and these things called meal kits. They're all super easy to make. He keeps yelling, protein and fiber, baby. Also, the food, we tried it. So good. So maybe check it out or whatever. Blue Apron. Get 15% off your first 2 orders plus free shipping with code LISTEN50. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
Where the scientific method is applied. And my entire life, I've been interested in science, quantum physics, theology, philosophy, archaeology, and then when I was practicing law, that puts you in everything. I had to work with forensics and physicists and doctors, and I worked a lot with head injury cases, and so I had to study the human brain. So when I began working very heavily with my mediumship, it dawned on me all of this ties together. And here's the thing. My dad being a Navy SEAL and a NASA engineer, I remember when I was 8 years old, we were talking about space. I was always talking about these esoteric things with Dad, and he loved it. He'd sit there and answer my questions about space and technology. And he said, Mark, a mystery is just a question that we don't yet have an answer for. And maybe our science, our technology has not been developed enough to find that answer, but it will if enough time and research is put into it. And so with me, spirits are coming to me, and I see people saying, oh, there's no explanation for it, or it's hocus pocus. I don't believe that. I believe that there is a reason why these things happen, how they happen, and where they happen. And so that led me on the quest to write The Afterlife Frequency. And I studied the structure of the brain, our anatomy, our physiology, and the scientific principles of energy transfer and frequency. And this is all part of what culminated in The Afterlife Frequency.
And it is a frequency for which they are able to communicate even with you. So can you explain for those that don't know, there's a brain wave frequency that you're able to reach easily?
Well, I mean, everybody can to varying extent. People say, well, why can't everybody do this? Well, we can all swim, but we're not all going to be gold medalists at the Olympics for swimming. We can all pound. I mean, I can pound around on a piano, but please don't expect me to, crank out, Brahms' Fourth Symphony. That's not going to happen because we're all good at different things. And we know from quantum physics that everything is made of molecules, which are made of atoms, which in turn are made of electrons, protons, and neutrons. And those in turn are made from the most minute particle, which is known as a quantum, which is pure electromagnetic energy. And for the physicists who are listening, yes, an electron is actually a quantum particle, okay, because it has a negative charge. But the thing is, at its most basic level, everything is electromagnetic energy. that you're sitting at, even though it's an inanimate object, is vibrating on some frequency. So are you. So are the radio waves that are transmitting the show. So is the light from the sun. Everything at its most basic unit is electromagnetic energy. Now let's expand that to our world. Think of our world, our planet Earth, our material world dimension as AM radio. AM radio obviously is amplitude and frequency. It's an energy system and it vibrates. Let's think of the afterlife frequency, the other side, as FM radio. So we have two systems, two energetic systems that operate side by side, and they're on different frequencies, but sometimes the frequencies overlap. So when we have spirit communication, which I actually think a better term is interdimensional communication, our material world dimension, the other side dimension, and this can be mediumship, this can be a visitation like your little boy sees, this can be a near-death experience, a shared death experience, a deathbed vision. This is an overlap of the AM and the FM radio. And so that's when you get a frequency alignment between the two dimensions. That's when we're reaching the afterlife frequency. And so I also want the listeners to understand that my book, please don't expect, when you hear quantum physics, don't expect a dry read. I trudged through enough boring books in law school and the practice of law. I promise I am not inflicting that on you. I try to explain these concepts in a way that anybody can understand it, and then I illustrate them with stories that can be fast-moving, sometimes funny, very emotional, because I want everybody to be able to enjoy this book, yet still understand the science that proves the existence of the afterlife and spirit communication.
If we just wanted to call our loved ones, you mentioned the quantum field. Is there, like, if we just projected a thought and said, I wish you'd come visit me or come around me today, they can access that?
You betcha. Oh, yeah, I call that a frequency beacon. And a frequency beacon, okay, let me ask you this. Have you ever been maybe driving in your car and all of a sudden you feel compelled to turn on the radio, and you do, and there's that song?
Right,
And you start, it touches your heartstrings because it makes you think of that special person who's passed. And I can tell from the way you said yes, that definitely. Do you think it was just a coincidence that precise moment you turned on the radio? What about ever catch a glimpse of a spirit in your peripheral vision, or you smell a familiar scent like a cologne, and there's no source for it, and that was okay. It is interesting because I think women get that even more, because a woman's olfactory sense of smell is much more highly developed and sensitive than a man's.
Hey, Kim gets her mom's scent all the time, a perfume that she used to wear, apparently. But Kim's home around me today, so.
You bet. Oh my God, perfect example of a frequency beacon. Well, that's because think of everyone that we love, both in this world and the other side, as being connected by a three-dimensional spider web. Okay, let's take the spider out of it because, they're kind of creepy, but they play their role. But the thing is, how does the spider web operate? Something hits it, it sends a vibration that the spider picks up on. And it's the same thing with spirits. So a spirit is sending a vibration to Kim, a sign that, her mom's around, and she sends it in the form of an olfactory sense. And you turned on that radio because a spirit sent you an impulse to turn on the radio so that you would hear that song and think of that person. And the thing about frequency beacons is that they work two ways. So you can be sitting there and thinking very heavily about a loved one, just like you asked, can you come to me? That will draw them to us. And so these are some of the things that I explain in the afterlife frequency, that everything is energetic. Now let's bring this closer to home. All right, you're a mom. You obviously have a great relationship with your little boy. Has anything ever happened with him that all of a sudden you felt like he wasn't around, but you felt, oh my gosh, something happened to him?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes.
Do you think that's a coincidence? No, that's a frequency beacon, because it also applies to our loved ones here in this world, and that the energetic tether, the connection between a parent and a child, is very strong. So let's say your son gets injured or hurt or he's scared or something, and all of a sudden you feel it and you can be miles away. This is not some airy-fairy theory. This is quantum entanglement. And quantum entanglement means that two subatomic particles are entangled and related, and if you do something to one, it immediately affects the other. And as scientists theorize, this applies even if the two particles are a billion, and I'm saying billion miles apart. So if you feel something going on with your son, and then you find out it's for real, that's because you are energetically linked to him.
Well, this just jarred a memory for me. I remember being in the 10th grade, and my teacher told me that her mom, I guess her mom and dad had been married for a long time, but he was a construction worker. And at the same time that he fell to his death, her mom was screamed out like she saw it or felt it or something. But she said it freaked her out really bad. I remember her telling us that.
Yeah, that is a frequency beacon, and that also that also splashes over into what's known as a shared death experience, an SDE. See, one of the things that makes the afterlife frequency different from other books written by mediums is that I've taken the different forms of interdimensional communication, whether it is through a medium or a visitation like you've described, like, turning on the radio, or Kim smelling a perfume, a near-death experience, a shared death experience, a deathbed vision, an out-of-body experience. And I see the commonality between them based on science and scientific principles and quantum entanglement. So what happened is, when this gentleman died and his wife felt it, that's because energetically they are linked. And it was this intense emotional contact between the two of them, that when he was dying, she felt it. And this is not something that's rare. This is reported so much all over the world. This has happened in my own family. My mother was very, very close to her father, and one Sunday morning she sat up in bed, and we were living in Orlando at the time, and she saw her father standing in the doorway, except he looked young and handsome, not the elderly man dying of cancer. And he was Italian, and he was wearing this double-breasted suit, and he wore this fedora hat, and he tipped his hat to her, which is something he always did when he left the room. And she goes, "Oh my God, Daddy's dead." My father's like, "Well, what'd you see, Jeannie? What'd you see?" And she was crying, and it was like 7 o'clock in the morning, and she called her brother, her mother, her sister, and then a couple hours later, her brother, my Uncle Joey, called and said, "Daddy died this morning at 7 o'clock. So at the very moment that her father died, he came to my mother, and he looked young and beautiful, handsome. And I've seen this phenomenon a lot during connections with spirits, where somebody will come through initially and they look, the way they did before they passed, so we can identify them. And then they morph into these young and beautiful versions of themselves. We also see this in near-death experiences, where people go into the light and they encounter loved ones, but they don't look old and infirm. They all look, like in their 20s and perfectly healthy physically.
Yeah, but they're doing that themselves, right? That's the image that they want to project to you.
Well, what's funny? One of the first times I connected with my mother after she passed was in the dream state. And all of a sudden I walked into this white room. Everything in it was white. All the furniture, the walls, everything was like white. And sitting in the corner at this table is my mother, and she's wearing this interesting dress. It had like splashes of black and blue and white. And actually, I remember that dress from when I was a kid. It was really kind of cool. And I walked up and I sat down and I go, "Mom, you look so young and beautiful. Why?" She goes, "Well, because I can." and I was laughing and then I realized what she was conveying to me. I'm pure energy. Energy never gets sick. It never gets old, it never gets tired, it never dies.
Mom, I like to propose a dinner optimization plan for 2026. Soccer practice every week. Get back late and you're stressed out about making something fast, but actually nutritious for dinner. When Ashley's mom picked me up, I noticed that she made Blue Apron. It came in like a little kit. By the time it was ready, I still had shin guards on. And it was real food, fresh veggies, protein, actual flavor. Take her from the younger generation. We're innovators. Keeping a couple Blue Apron meals around. Not the worst idea.
Get 50% off your first 2 orders plus free shipping with code LISTEN50. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
We get it. Attention spans just aren't what they used to be. Heads in social media and eyes on Netflix. But what do people do with their ears? Well, for one, they're listening to audio. Americans spend 4.5.
Continue it tomorrow morning. Bye.